Holmium is a continuous energy emission laser with a wavelength of 2140 nanometer. See, again, holmium is a pulsed energy emission laser. That's the difference between there's a different holmium and other laser types. This is a pulsed energy emission laser. So obviously this is a false choice. Okay, so the wavelength is strongly absorbed by water and water-rich tissues, which is a true option. Okay, which is why it is used for enucleation of the prostate and vaporization of the prostate. Okay, because the tissue contains good amount of water, and it can the depth required and the absorption coefficient is favorable to do the surgery of the prostate. It is ideally suited for glands less than 40 grams. Again, it is a false option because uh, holmium laser is used for larger glands, 40 grams, 60 grams, up to 75 grams. It's ideally suited for monopolar or bipolar TURP, whichever option is available. And it is delivered through a 365 micron laser fiber. Again, this option is a false option. Okay, because it is delivered through a, for the purpose of prostate surgery, it is delivered through a 550 micron laser fiber. So you'll have to remember this. It is delivered through a 550 micron laser fiber. So the you can see choice one is false. It is very, if you don't read it properly, you may actually think that this is the true choice because the wavelength is 2140 nanometer. So you have to be careful about it. It's a pulsed energy emission laser. So answer is B, because this is the only true choice. The other two, again, A, C, D are false choices. So B is the true choice. So B is the answer. Okay, can we move to the next topic? So I had basically, the next slide had given the page number, the Campbell reference basically, where you'll find more information about this. It's very important to know the types of lasers that we are using. So this is a small table that I got, which can be useful. The applications of different lasers in urology. Yeah. So can I move to the next slide if it's not a problem? Yeah. So again, so I think Karthikeyan is trying to sort that slide out, the types of lasers, because I can see it as a very small slide. I don't know how the rest are seeing it as. So I can kind of read it out from my slide. So this has basically given the wavelengths of holmium, YAG laser, holmium, YAG, and thulium. So wavelength of it's almost similar. For holmium, it's around 2140, and for thulium, it's between 1750 and 2200. The tissue penetration is almost similar. That's why thulium is also used as a for enucleation of the prostate. Holmium, YAG, the tissue penetration is 0.5, that is half a centimeter, and thulium is 0.4. So basically, this is the effect to which the laser energy is basically generating heat. So what is the tissue effect that happens? Basically, vaporization is occurring. Okay, vaporization is occurring of the prostate tissue, and the clinical applications of holmium are in stones, bladder tumor, urethral strictures, prostate ablation, or enucleation, whereas thulium is mainly used for prostate ablation. KTP laser, which is the potassium titanyl phosphate, the wavelength is 532 nanometer. The tissue penetration is more than that of holmium and thulium. It is 0.8 mm. And that also causes vaporization. It's mainly used for prostate ablation. It's not used for enucleation. Okay. So the uh, carbon dioxide laser, the tissue penetration is 0.5 mm, and the wavelength is 10,600, and it is used for lesions of the external genitalia to ablate the lesions. Okay, and other uh, laser that is used is diode laser. The tissue penetration is more, mainly has a coagulation effect, and it's used for prostate coagulation. Okay, and yeah, these are the main types, but mainly questions are asked about the holmium, and the other application is in stones. The difference between the application in stones and the application in prostate is that in stones, the wattage, that is the power required, is you can manage with lesser power, that is up to 30 watts. Whereas in prostate enucleation, you need power up to 80 to 100 watts. So higher the power, higher the fiber. So the fiber sizes come as 200, 360, 550. In stone, we are using smaller fibers preferably because we are using it through ureteroscopes. Whereas in prostate, you are using bigger fibers. That's why you can apply higher power. You cannot apply such high power with a thinner fiber because it can damage the fiber. So that is a concept you'll have to understand. Okay, can we move on to the next slide? So this is again a question about urinary retention. So again, comes under prostate unit in Campbell. So false about acute urinary retention. Okay, false about acute urinary retention. So first you should know what is acute urinary retention. So it's a acute onset painful inability to pass urine. Okay, so choice A, it can be spontaneous or acquired. Okay, choice B, all patients with acute urinary retention due to BPH should be operated upon. Choice C, advanced age and large retention volume more than 1 liter predict failure of trial without catheter. Choice D, about 80% of patients with successful trial without catheter land up with repeat episode in 6 months. Again, acute urinary retention is a very commonly faced practical problem, and you should know, not just from the entrance point of view, just generally how to manage it. So it can be spontaneous or acquired. So these are the two types of urinary retention, acute urinary retention. Spontaneous means there has been no precipitating cause. What are the precipitating causes? For example, some kind of surgery, some spinal anesthesia was received, or some other painful anal procedure was done due to which the patient's urinary retention has been sorry. I'm talking about the acquired causes. Spontaneous causes is when there is no other predisposing cause. Okay, so I was discussing the predisposing causes, some sympathomimetic drugs which you're taking for cold, like cold medications, cough syrup, or some antidepressant medications. Okay, or patient is taking some anticholinergics. So such medications can precipitate. Okay, it's also called precipitated urinary retention. So spontaneous retention is when none of these predisposing causes are there. Patient has some outflow obstruction, and as a natural progression of his disease, he has gone into urinary retention. Acquired means it is basically precipitated by any of the causes that I had just mentioned. So that is a true option. Okay, so that's not the correct answer. The next option is all patients with acute retention due to BPH should be operated upon. Again, let's go to third option. Let's see the other two options and come back to B. Third option is advanced age and large retention volume more than 1 liter predict failure of trial without catheter. So basically what we do when a patient comes with acute urinary retention, you are going to catheterize the patient. So after catheterization, you will start the alpha blocker medication, especially if it is because of prostate. Obviously, if the patient is not on alpha blockers, you will start on alpha blockers, and you will give a trial without catheter after say 3 days to 7 days. It varies depending on the protocol that you're using, and that time you will see whether the patient is able to pass urine. So about 60% to 70% of the times, as per Campbell, patients are successful in the trial without the catheter. But there are a few things that can predict failure of trial without catheter. For example, if advanced stage, okay, patient is very elderly, not immobile, large retention volume, the bladder capacity is very large. Okay, the retention volume when you inserted the catheter was around 1 liter was drained immediately. Okay, so that predicts again that it is the reference is Campbell 12th edition. These are the two some of the causes that predict the failure of trial without catheter. And another important fact is 80% of patients with successful trial without catheter, they can land up with a repeat episode in 6 months. Again, this is directly from Campbell itself. Around 80%, if they are just given medical management, okay, and they can land up with the repeat episode of trial without catheter, repeat episode of retention within the next 6 months. Okay, so all patients with acute urinary retention due to BPH should be operated upon. So this is the false option, because not everybody will require surgery. You can manage them medically. There will be a smaller percentage, 20 to 30 to 40% of patients who can be managed without surgery, with optimal use of alpha blockers and 5 alpha reductase combination. Okay, so for this answer is B. Okay, so could you go to the next slide, please? Again, this was the page number, the Campbell reference, which I wanted to refer for this. Next slide, please. Okay, now coming to multiparametric MRI. So multiparametric MRI is a very useful tool in the investigation of prostate diseases, and especially in prostate cancer, which it's got a lot of usage nowadays. So about this, true fact is always utilizes gadolinium contrast. Choice B, PIRADS 3 has likelihood of positivity on biopsy in the range of 20 to 30%. Choice C, very useful in impalpable disease and PSA less than 10. And choice D, exclusively used for diseases of the prostate. Again, let's take it choice by one, the options. So multiparametric MRI, what is multiparametric MRI? So using multiple parameters on MRI to detect prostate cancer or to detect any malignancy or any the disease that you're trying to look for. Okay, so multiparametric MRI uses basically in prostate. If you take the example of prostate, it uses T2 weighted imaging, it uses diffusion weighted imaging, it uses dynamic contrast enhanced imaging. So based on all these factors, the radiologist is able to give you a result uh, uh, on a Likert type scale from PIRADS 1 to PIRADS 5. PIRADS 1 and 2, there is no suspicion of prostate cancer, and PIRADS 3, it's equivocal. PIRADS 4 and 5 is very likely that they'll have prostate cancer. So it doesn't always use gadolinium contrast, because the radiologist utilizes a contrast if there is some doubt on T2 weighted plus diffusion weighted imaging. That time, especially if there is a patient, if the radiologist wants to differentiate between PIRADS 3 and PIRADS 4, he uses contrast. So always uses gadolinium contrast is not true. There are many centers now which are not using gadolinium contrast as a rule. Okay, the next option, PIRADS 3 has a likelihood of positivity on biopsy in the range of 20 to 30. In PIRADS 3, it's almost like 50-50%. So it is the likelihood of positivity is around 50%. Okay, and these have been proven by long-term studies. So in the option C, very useful in impalpable disease and PSA less than 10. So this is a true fact, because the utility of pre-biopsy MRI is highest in this group of people in whom you don't have a palpable nodule, and the PSA is in the range of less than 10 nanogram per ml, and used exclusively for disease of prostate. Multiparametric MRI has been used in disease in kidney malignancies also, and it's not used exclusively for disease of the prostate. Again, that's a false option. So the true option is option C, which is very useful in impalpable disease and PSA less than 10. So multiparametric MRI is a very important topic. A lot of questions can come from this, and it's a very practically relevant topic in today's scenario. Could I go to the next slide? So, true about neuroendocrine carcinoma of prostate. So, you have to know that prostate carcinoma is not just adenocarcinoma. There are other variants, and neuroendocrine carcinoma of prostate is an aggressive variant of prostate cancer. So, true about neuroendocrine carcinoma of prostate. Option A is high PSA levels, in spite of treatment, should raise suspicion. Option B is exclusive metastasis to bone and lung. Option C is treatment of choice is androgen deprivation. And option D is may be responsive to radiation and chemotherapy. So what is important to know about neuroendocrine carcinoma, okay, is that it is one of the malignancies of the prostate that are not dependent on androgens. Okay, it is more, it doesn't behave like adenocarcinoma of prostate, and in most cases you will see low or no rise of low PSA or no rise of PSA at all. So whenever you get a hard prostatic mass and the PSA levels are normal, it should raise a suspicion of neuroendocrine carcinoma of prostate. Okay, so high PSA levels are almost never seen. I mean, if they are coexisting, it's a different matter. Or if the adenocarcinoma has de-differentiated into something like this, then it's a different matter. But high PSA levels, in spite of treatment, should raise suspicion is a false option. It is not a true option. The next option is exclusive metastasis to bone and lung. Okay, so this has typically, because it doesn't behave like adenocarcinoma of prostate, it metastasizes to uh, other visceral structures like the liver and the brain. So rapidly growing prostatic mass with visceral metastasis is the hallmark, and even if it goes to the bone, it is usually osteolytic metastasis as compared to adenocarcinoma, which gives osteoblastic metastasis. So it does not give exclusive metastasis. So again, that is a false option. Again, a treatment of choice is androgen deprivation. Again, this in this, as I said, it is not hormone dependent, it is not androgen dependent. So treatment of choice is definitely not androgen deprivation. So the choice number D is maybe responsive to radiation and chemotherapy. So this is the only correct option, because the treatment for this is a combination of taxanes and some taxane based chemotherapy with cisplatin or etoposide, and radiation therapy may also be useful in this case. So this is again, next slide please. Okay, again, this is from Campbell Urology, which where neuroendocrine carcinoma has been dealt with. Could you please enlarge the slide if it's possible? Wait, I'll just go through my own. I must be having it. Yeah, 1 second. I'll go through my own, sorry, keynote presentation. Yeah, so neuroendocrine prostate cancer is a rapidly growing disease. And, when there are visceral involvement and osteolytic metastasis with hypercalcemia and parenchymal brain mets, it should further raise the index of suspicion. PSA is most commonly undetectable, okay, or very low. And serum chromogranin A and urine serotonin may be detectable, but you don't have to have them for a necessary diagnosis. I mean, it's not necessary for diagnosis. And they are unresponsive to hormonal manipulation and are transiently sensitive to radiation and chemo. Okay, and platinum etoposide or platinum taxane combinations. Okay. Yeah. So I think, yeah, I just finished the 5 questions. So there are some questions in chat. 1 second. Okay. Yeah, I thought it's a question. Oh, that's a comment by the admin. So sorry for the technical glitch. I was unable to share my screen. So if there are any questions, feel free to ask about this question. So sometimes in the exam, there are two choices that look like the correct option. And many times you will face that. Like, for example, in the first question that I asked, so it's very, very unlikely to be seen in bipolar, but the other option looked more correct. So, so you have to be aware that sometimes two choices may be very close, and you may have to choose one over the other. Okay. I hope, yeah, you could follow what I was trying to say. Thank you very much. I think I'll stop the class for here. It would be happy. I would be happy to engage with anybody who has some doubts. We could take the discussion further. Thank you very much. And sorry for the technical glitch in the beginning.
Yeah, it's okay. So these are the questions where we will see the clinical knowledge is also important. So you have to apply the clinical knowledge along with your Campbell knowledge to identify the correct answer.
Yeah.